The mind has a dark side. Most fear it. Few understand it. Dark Mind Insights. Master the unseen.
The most dangerous person in the room is not the loudest. It is the one who says nothing, yet understands everything. Silence is not absence. It is pressure. It is control without movement. It is the ability to sit still while others reveal themselves piece by piece. Most people speak to be seen. The intelligent learn to disappear in plain sight, and in that disappearance they gain something others never notice. They gain access to truth without resistance, because when you stop trying to be heard, people stop guarding what they say around you, and that is when you begin to see what is real, not what is performed, not what is polished, but what is hidden beneath. Long before modern psychology attempted to explain human behavior, Niccolò Machiavelli understood something deeper. People do not operate based on ideals. They operate based on advantage, fear, perception, and self-interest. In The Prince, power is never described as moral. It is described as effective. And effectiveness depends on control. Not loud control, not obvious control, but subtle control, the kind that does not announce itself. Silence is one of those tools, because every time you speak, you reduce ambiguity, and when ambiguity disappears, people understand you, and when people understand you, they adjust to you. But when you remain silent, you stay undefined, and what is undefined cannot be easily predicted, measured, or controlled. Section 1. Silence exposes hidden jealousy. Silence does not create jealousy, it exposes it, because jealousy requires comparison, and comparison requires information. When you constantly speak about your progress, your plans, your direction, people measure themselves against you with clarity. But when you remove that clarity, something more unstable emerges: imagination. And imagination rarely stays realistic. It exaggerates, it distorts, it fills gaps with assumptions. You become quiet. You stop updating people about your life, not out of fear, but out of control. At first, nothing changes. Then curiosity begins. Then subtle tension. Questions become sharper, not casual, focused, intentional. What are you really doing? Why so quiet? Are you working on something? Notice the shift. They are no longer engaging with you. They are trying to decode you. And in that process, their insecurity begins to surface, because now they are no longer comparing themselves to your reality. They are comparing themselves to their own imagination of you. And that imagination often places you ahead of them, more successful, more focused, more disciplined. Whether it is true or not becomes irrelevant. What matters is perception. Silence removes your control over how people see you, but in doing so, it often amplifies your perceived power. And for those already insecure, that amplification becomes uncomfortable. Their tone changes, their behavior shifts, not because you said anything, but because you stopped saying everything. Section 2. Fake loyalty fears you're quiet. Most relationships feel stable not because they are strong, but because they are predictable. People feel comfortable when they understand you, when they can anticipate your reactions, your decisions, your emotional patterns. That understanding creates a sense of control, not always malicious, but real. When you speak often, you reinforce that control. You explain your reasoning. You share your thoughts. You make your internal world accessible. But silence removes that access. And when access disappears, uncertainty replaces it. You stop explaining yourself. You stop oversharing. You respond less. You act more. And suddenly, something shifts in others. They begin to question you. Not directly, subtly. You've been different lately. You don't talk like you used to. Is everything okay? These are not just concerns, they are attempts to re-establish access, to reopen the channel you quietly closed, because your silence disrupted their ability to read you, and people are uncomfortable when they cannot read you. Not knowing where they stand with you creates tension. Not understanding your intentions creates distance, and that distance feels like disconnection, even if nothing actually changed. Fake loyalty depends on familiarity. It depends on routine. It depends on constant visibility. But real loyalty does not require constant explanation. It does not panic in the presence of silence. It does not demand access to validate connection. Silence reveals this difference clearly. Those who are secure remain steady. Those who relied on understanding you begin to lose their balance. Section 3. Silent competition operates in the background. Not all competition is declared. In fact, most of it is hidden. People rarely announce themselves as your rival. They observe you first, quietly, patiently. They learn how you think, how you move, how you decide. And they do this while appearing supportive, friendly, engaged. You share an idea, something early, something unrefined. They listen, they nod, they encourage. But what you do not see is what happens after that moment. They think about it, they analyze it, they improve it. Because now they have something valuable, your starting point. And starting points are powerful. Weeks later, they act, and what they produce is not identical. It is sharper, more structured, more prepared, because they had time you gave them without realizing it. This is the hidden cost of unnecessary expression. You're not just speaking, you're exposing your process. And once your process is visible, it can be studied, refined, replicated. Silence protects that process. It delays visibility. It keeps your development hidden until execution. And in environments where timing determines success, that delay becomes an advantage. Because by the time others understand what you are doing, you are already ahead. Section 4. Emotional manipulation feeds on expression. Manipulation is built on patterns, and patterns are built on reactions. Every emotional response you give becomes data, not abstract data, precise data. Data that tells someone exactly how to reach you. You react strongly to criticism. That becomes a point of entry. You seek reassurance when ignored. That becomes leverage. You defend yourself when questioned. That becomes a trigger. Over time, these reactions form a map, and maps are used to navigate influence. Manipulators do not need to guess. They only need to observe. And once they observe enough, they adjust. They test small, then slightly larger, then more direct. Each step refining their understanding of you until what feels like coincidence becomes consistency. But silence interrupts this system. When you feel something but do not express it, the data is incomplete. The pattern breaks. The map becomes unclear. Without clear feedback, manipulation loses precision. It becomes guesswork again, and guesswork is weak. Silence does not mean you feel nothing. It means you choose what becomes visible, and what remains invisible cannot be easily targeted. Section 5. Your words become weapons against you. Information shared in trust does not always stay in trust. Some people do not listen to support you. They listen to understand you deeply enough to use that understanding later. Not immediately, but when it becomes useful. You speak about your fears, your doubts, your past mistakes. It feels relieving, honest, human. But what you forget is that information, once shared, cannot be taken back. It exists in someone else's memory, and memory is patient. Months pass, situations change, and then one day, in a moment of conflict, that same information returns, not as support, but as a weapon. That's why you always fail. That's your weakness. The words land harder because they are accurate, and accuracy gives them weight. Silence reduces exposure. It limits what others can store. It creates boundaries around your internal world. Not everyone deserves access to your depth, and without that access, their ability to target you becomes limited. Section 6. Betrayal is predictable. Betrayal rarely appears without warning. It leaves patterns, subtle at first, easy to ignore. Someone asks detailed questions repeatedly. They show strong interest in your direction, your plans, your next move, but they rarely share their own. The exchange is unbalanced. They extract more than they give. This imbalance is a signal, not of curiosity, but of intention. Most people ignore these patterns because they are distracted by words, but silence shifts your focus from words to behavior. When you speak less, you notice more. You see consistency. You see repetition. You see who gathers information and who shares it. You begin to understand that betrayal is not sudden, it is gradual, built through small moments that seem harmless until they connect. And once they connect, the pattern becomes clear. Silence allows you to see those connections earlier. Section 7. Strategic distance builds value. Constant presence reduces impact. When you are always available, always responding, always engaging, your presence becomes expected, and what is expected loses weight. But when you create distance, when your presence is not constant, when your words are not frequent, something changes. People begin to pay attention. They notice when you speak. They remember what you say. Not because the content changed, but because the frequency did. Silence creates scarcity, and scarcity increases perceived value. This is not manipulation, it is human psychology. People naturally assign importance to what feels limited. Distance, when used intentionally, becomes positioning. It separates you from constant noise. It allows your presence to stand out without effort. Section 8. Perception creates power. Power is shaped by perception, not just action. When you speak often, you define yourself for others. You make it easy for them to categorize you, to understand your limits, to predict your behavior. But silence removes that clarity. It keeps parts of you undefined. And what remains undefined creates tension. People begin to fill that space with assumptions, often exaggerating your capability, your discipline, your intent. The unknown is difficult to confront because it cannot be measured. Silence keeps you partially unknown, and that partial unknown becomes influence, because people hesitate around what they cannot fully understand, and hesitation creates advantage. Conclusion. Silence is not weakness. It is restraint. It is the discipline to hold information instead of releasing it, to observe instead of reacting, to understand instead of explaining. Over time, this restraint changes how you move. You stop feeling the need to respond to everything. You stop revealing unnecessary details. You stop explaining yourself to people who are not aligned with you. And as you reduce what you give away, you reduce what others can use. You become harder to predict, harder to manipulate, harder to control. Not because you became louder, but because you became quieter. And in that quiet, you gained awareness. And awareness is where control begins. If you see this clearly, then you're already moving differently. Stay there. Because the next level is not just about staying silent, it's about knowing exactly when to speak. And that is where real power begins.